The year 1900 began a new century, but brought with it an old desire. Aviation pioneers the world over continued to work diligently, hoping to discover the secrets of flight. First with models, kites, and gliders, success was hard-earned and progress seemed slow. Then 1903 brought the history-making events of Kitty Hawk. By 1907, everyone, from governments to industries, from the press to spellbound observers and grumbling skeptics, had to admit that the era of the flying machine had arrived. In that same year, on January 28, 1907, came another arrival in Lake Arthur, Louisiana, the birth of Elrey B. Jeppesen.
Well, that's the first thing I remember, watching the little eagles, come swooping around, picking up some chickens once in a while. I studied how they were flying on that thing. Those old airplanes, when you started down the runway, you could kind of feel the air take a hold of the wings and take a hold of the controls. Whereas today, you don't feel any of that at all. And that just made you part of the bird itself.
As the years would prove, this boy who couldn't stop thinking about flying was destined to make aviation history.
I'm a product of the 1920 barnstorming days. In 1921, I took my first airplane ride with a barnstorming pilot and a Jenny. Really got a thrill out of it. Thought to myself, boy, this is for me. Several years later, I got my pilot's license. It was signed by Orville Wright. I was 19 years old and raring to go. Rounded up $500 and bought the airplane and started flying. I was better than being on the football team. Couldn't have had more fun. I gave up high school. I was going to go to MIT, be an aeronautical engineer, but I never did get out of the airplane long enough.
For a while, Jeppesen, better known as Jepp, was employed by the Tex Rankin Flying Circus as a ticket seller, prop twister, aerobatic pilot, and wing walker.
I was a very timid wing walker. Only reason I'd do it is when the fellow wouldn't show up. So in order to keep the 5 o'clock crowd and keep them there so we'd keep hauling passengers, well, I'd get out and make 2 or 3 passes around the thing and hang on to the wing or do some little thing. But I was no pro. I want to get back in the airplane. Things are pretty slow, and Tex Rankin said, well, you see that raw-boned gal over there with a flying suit on? He said, she'll never know how to fly. But he says, if you just want to go around the pattern and make a little money, why, go ahead. So I went over there and introduced myself. And eventually, about 6 hours later, I turned her loose over at Pearson Field. And I came back and told Tex about it. God, Tex got so scared. He says, you what? You turned my airplane to her? His voice got higher, and I thought I was going to get fired. I said, Tex, here's what you do. You go over there and get in that walker with Dorothy and let Dorothy take you for a ride, which he did. And he came back, and gosh, he was all smiling. He came over to me and says, guys, Jepp, he says, she flies like a boy. But what really happened is she made 76 consecutive outside loops in 1933 over Omaha. When she landed, the newspaper fellow asked her, why'd you stop? She said, I ran out of gas.
In 1930, the daring young Jeppesen signed on as an airmail pilot, flying for Boeing Air Transport. Jepp took on the treacherous, uncharted terrain between Salt Lake City and Cheyenne. His passion for flying seemed to overshadow the dangers of being a professional aviator.
Well, you couldn't go to the university library and find out how to run an airline. Yeah, we were solving the problems daily. I thought it was pretty exciting.
Since there were no aeronautical charts, pilots in those days used road maps to help them navigate. And of course, pilots could always follow the Union Pacific Railroad track, which they called hugging the UP. Jeppesen managed to survive as an airmail pilot, but many of his fellow aviators did not.
That winter, we lost 4 of our 18 pilots, all good friends.
Responsible for finding his own way, Jepp made notes on everything and anything that would keep him flying the safest routes.
And Bill Boyne gives us a nice big airplane. The post office gives us a sack of mail. It's your business to get from A to B. And that's where the little black book came in to keep giving me the information I needed, and whether I'm going to go through this canyon or through this one, and whether I could see the lights through the pass and all that sort of thing. How high was this? And the weather was moving in from the north or moving in from the south. I'm trying to figure out what happens. Can you get around this mountain, or are you going to run into a problem? Man, you're going down the railroad tracks, you're getting down pretty low, you know, and kind of nice to know which side the water tank's on. And these old fellows have been around there for 8 or 10 years, and they'd memorized most of it. And being on reserve, which I was, you had to, they'd move me all over. One time I'd fly from Salt Lake to Reno, next time I'd be at Cheyenne going to Omaha, and then somebody would get hurt or sick or something, and send me to Chicago, and then back to Salt Lake. I got a lot of experience. That's the reason I wrote it down. I couldn't remember all that.
Jepp went to great extremes to collect information for his little black book. Strapping on as many as 3 altimeters, he climbed mountains and smokestacks to record elevations. From Chicago to Oakland, he spoke to police, engineers, and surveyors, anyone with facts and figures that could be added to his book. Meticulously drawn by hand, Jepp included airport layouts with field lengths and elevations, locations of emergency landing areas, and potentially dangerous obstacles. He even listed the phone numbers of farmers to call for weather reports along his route.
Got a lot of cooperation from farmers, you know, and sheriffs, and even cowboys out in Wyoming. And that part of it wasn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be.
As fellow pilots showed interest in Jepp's little black book of charts, Jepp began making copies. He sold his pocket airway manual for $10 each, and before he knew it, Jepp was in business. In the late 1930s, Boeing Air Transport and several other companies merged to become United Airlines, and Jepp became a captain. Back then, United was printing its own charts, but when pilots insisted that they preferred Jepp's charts, United subscribed to the Jeppesen Airway Manual Service. Soon, many other airlines did the same.
You remember they had that big tower outside of Fort Bridger? You said, I want to see the altitude of that thing. I want to know the altitude of that tower. So you were flying, and you kept going lower and lower, and you said, well, it's about 100 feet below us, so it must be that. And so then he said, hold it. So then you made that note in your book. I'll never forget that, Fort Bridger. I always thought of Fort Bridger after that with you, because you don't hear those things anymore.
Well, needless to say, it was a ton of fun. It was a ton of fun, and there wasn't anything in the world we'd rather do than fly.
I lost 2 engines on a DC-8 coming from Washington to Denver in the middle of a big thunderstorm and everything else, and it was pretty touch and go to get into Omaha, Nebraska. I'll never forget that one.
Engines never quit on me. I wouldn't allow it.